Ignore there's that reference up there. While Paul was waiting, verse 16, while Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happened to be there. A group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. Some of them asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" Others remarked, "He seems to be advocating foreign gods." They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Then they took him and brought him to the meeting of the Areopagus, where they said to him, "May we know what this new teaching is that you're presenting? You're bringing some strange ideas into our ears, and we would like to know what they mean." All the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas. Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious, for as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship. And this is what I'm going to proclaim to you." We'll pause there. Do keep that open in front of you. Before we get to a conversation with Tony, we're thinking about this. Is this going to work? That way. A slightly different one. And here's a question just to have in your minds. How does anyone become a Christian? And if you've been a Christian long enough, you probably know there are some pretty big pieces that go into answering that. The first big one is it really does depend on God. It will take a sovereign and gracious God to intervene in order to save someone. We can't do it by ourselves. God will need to do it. The second big piece that you begin to come to realize is he does that by the power of his Spirit through the good news message about Jesus. And we give it the shorthand title of the gospel. And you get those things in place, and you can reduce things down to two fairly simple things, if you like: God's part and our part. We speak the message, God does the saving, and that can be really helpful. Reminds us we need to speak. We should talk to people. Reminds us that in the end it doesn't rely on us. And it's good to keep things simple. The danger, of course, is that in simplifying things, you can, at times unintentionally, distort them. We could end up sharing this good news message about Jesus as just a mechanical thing, as long as we've said the right sequence of words. We've done our part. And don't worry about the results, because that's down to God, not us, and we'll just leave it at that. I think Paul gives an insight here into a slightly fuller approach to a way that God draws people to himself, and the way we can help as people are finding out about Jesus, becoming Christians. Let me give you these 3 C's just to think about, to outline some aspects of Paul's approach: caring, considerate, communication. It's caring. As you look at this reading, if it's still there in front of you, Paul, did you notice that Paul, in those early verses, looking around Athens, is distressed by the idolatry? And I assume his distress goes in 2 directions. Idolatry inevitably takes glory away from God, puts something in God's place, and it also keeps people away from God because they're occupied by something else. Paul's distressed by those things, and Paul cares about both things. His evangelism, if you like, his sharing of the good news, is something he really cares about, both because he cares about God and he cares about people. It's considerate. Did you notice the variety of people he's speaking with? We're told in these few verses, he speaks to Jewish people, he speaks to God-fearing Greeks, he's in the marketplace with just everyone who's there, the traders, buyers and sellers. We're told he he gets talking to some Epicurean philosophers. For them, pleasure is the thing that you really want to live for. And some Stoic philosophers, they're more about duty. And you will know if you've lived in Cambridge for any length of time that we live in an international city. You've discovered the variety of ways different people from different cultures think. You know, if you've even met somebody from the south of England and somebody from Scotland, there's differences, and communication. Things work in different ways, and then you add in people from all over the world, all sorts of different ideas about things. And if you can keep that in mind, can you imagine the amount of listening and thinking that Paul was doing as he met different people? And it's not just the people themselves. Did you notice, I think it's in verse 23, he says, as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar to an unknown God. He's looking at their, as he goes around to say, he's looking at their, I guess you could think about it this way, he's looking at their cultural artifacts. What are the things you produce? The artistic elements in them, the religious elements in them. And he's looking at all of those things. And later in verse 28, he'll even quote one of the poets that they would be familiar with in the day. He is trying to understand, how do these people think about life? And then that third three communicate. When Paul speaks to people, by the time he's really talking with them, by the time he gets to the Areopagus and he's speaking to them about God and the good news of Jesus, you understand that he really cares. And he's really trying to consider how they're thinking. When he speaks, it's like he's saying, look, this is the way I think you see the world. Am I right? And now into that, I'm going to tell you something about Jesus that is incredible. That's what he's wanting to do. I want to understand you. I want to hear how you think. And then I want to tell you about Jesus. We're going to talk about films. And I think we'll discover, amongst other things, they will give a window into the way people think. And they can help us as we try and be caring and considerate with them. And as we try and communicate. And good for us to keep remembering, we want to be, as a church family, caring and considerate as we try and communicate, looking to, as we've talked about this year, share our hope in Jesus with those around us. I'm going to pray briefly and then invite Tony up, and then I'm going to give you a question just to get you chatting with one another for a few moments. And Lord God, thank you for the way you speak to us in the reality of the world we live in. Thank you that you're caring and considerate as you communicate. And you want us to be as well as we talk with others. Please help us with that as we think about it tonight. Amen. Tony, do come up and join me at the front. We'll hear a bit more from you in a moment. But for all of you, just as we... Now, let me find what my question is. I had a question just for you to start. Oh, look, here's a question just with the people sitting beside you. You think around some of these. Can you remember the first film you saw? You know, have a look at that one. Or can you think, and this maybe more recently, a film that's thrilled you, or maybe a film that's made you either sad, made you cry, or made you angry as you watched it? So just take a minute or two with people sitting around you. First film you saw, if you can remember that, or a film that's made an impact on you in some way, and just chat with people nearby. I imagine all sorts of different ones. Tony's was Bambi. Does anyone else have that as your first one? Oh, look at that. Look at that. People of a certain generation. And the first. Here's a couple of other questions for you. 2024, number of films released in the US. What do you think? How many? A little quiz question for you. 569. That is quite a lot. And I don't have the numbers for the US, but the UK box office revenue for 2024. I mean, I could just ask you, but it's just a game of guessing at that point, isn't it? So let me tell you, £980 million. So just shy of £1 billion, which goes to say, even as some people talk about cinema declining, it's still big, it's still a huge industry in all sorts of different platforms, and we will pay for it. We want it. Tony, it's... Thank you for agreeing to do this. Some of us will know you. Some of us may know a little bit about your work and things. But if I was to say, just as we get into this, films have been, if I was to say, a significant part of your life for a long time, not just enjoying them and work as well. Yeah. Tell us how that's been, how they've been involved in life.
I've always loved film, and then when I was a UCCF staff worker in the mid-90s, I can't remember how far back it was, mid-90s, I was doing a lot of training students in understanding culture, and so I was using film for that, and thought, actually, film is a much bigger, richer thing than I'd really thought about properly. And then I was invited to help set up a new organisation in '96 called Damaris, the name of which comes from Acts 17. She was one of the people who became a Christian through Paul's preaching in the Areopagus. And so that was all about helping Christians understand and relate to contemporary culture. So within that, I ran the Culture Watch website, which had, I think, getting on for, by the time I left in 2014, we had nearly 3,000 articles and discussion guides on films, music, television, books, but films was the biggie there. And I did a lot of speaking about culture and film, media more generally, teaching people how to understand it, and a lot of film discussions. So loads of film discussions with mixed audiences, Christian, non-Christian audiences. They're so much fun.
Yeah, they are. So I worked for UCCF a bit of time after you, and I came across this website, Damaris, and I thought, this is fascinating. And I also, during that time, somebody saying to me about watching a film, what do you think it's about? And I thought nobody had ever asked me the question before, and I thought, it's just a film, isn't it? And then beginning to see, I guess I was slower than you are to think there's all sorts of wonderful things to engage with within it. So that's some of the background, website discussion, helping people engage. If I was to say this, look, films are stories in a particular form. So as a kind of, I'm not sure if this is a background question, but even before we get to what's going on in films, why do we tell stories? And why are films, do you think, such a powerful way of telling stories?
Stories are just deep in the human psyche, aren't they? We've always been storytellers, right from the beginning of human history. It seems that as soon as we have language, we're telling stories. People sit around campfires telling stories. People have always told stories. It's no accident, is it, that a huge chunk of the Bible is narrative. I can't remember the proportions, but it's an awful lot of the Old Testament. It's narrative pretty much until you get to Psalms. And then there's smatterings of it from there onwards. We have the first 5 books of the New Testament are narrative. So God himself reveals to us in stories. And I think that's an indication that he has made us, he's wired us in a certain way to resonate with stories. Stories are how we come to understand the world, and how we come to understand our place in the world, how we come to understand ourselves. And so, you ask me about film in my life, and I start telling you a story of what's happened to me. And that's what we always do when we're meeting people, getting to know people. We tell the stories of our lives, and so we have some sense of a big story, and our story fits into that in some way. And then we've got lots of little stories within that. So constantly telling stories. Salman Rushdie says we're storytelling animals, which I quite like. I mean, you may object to being called an animal, but...
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? That still wants to... I mean, that's not explaining the why of it, isn't it? He's just observing a thing. I mean, and that is, I guess what you're saying, is very observable, isn't it? We are storytelling animals. We do it. You said the way we're wired. My friend's... one of my friend's son, paraphrasing him slightly, but his question to his dad was, when he was about 8 years old, it was kind of around this kind of thing. Daddy, why do the films make you feel funny on the inside?
Brilliant.
Which is I think it's a great question, isn't it? To which his dad said, what do you think? And his son said, I knew you were going to say that. I asked you first.
That's a fair response.
To which his dad said, well, I think the reason is because God has made us that way. Mm-hmm. To which his son said, I knew you were going to say that as well. But anyway, theologically, is there a way of thinking about that as well? So not just storytelling animals. We're wired that way? Is there things in the Bible that would seem to reflect this is what's going to happen with people?
I think so. I think if God is revealing himself through so much narrative, I think there's probably a sense in which he, the way that narrative works in terms of helping us to put pieces together and to make sense of things, that's clearly a key way in which we're going to be able to understand who he is and his love for us, his care for us, what his intention for us to be part of his family and so on. So he could have revealed himself in a set of dull propositions that we sign up to. But that's not how he's made us. He's made us he's made us emotional and creative. So the creativity in storytelling is huge. We tell stories because we're made in the image of God. We are like God in some sense. God is creative, God is a storyteller, and we're like that in some ways. We're not just rational beings, there's an emotional side to us, and stories capture our emotions, they take us on an emotional journey.
We'll come on to that. In a second, what they're doing. I read some of the stuff, you sent me some articles you'd written, and it reminded me of a headline, I don't know if it was last year, around the post office scandal. I think Niv had commented on it as well. It said something like, it took an ITV drama to finally get some action on the post office scandal. And I thought the way it was framed is almost as saying, look what it's taken. We've had all the information for ages, but it's only when people watch a drama. And I guess what you're saying is, don't be surprised by that. Don't be surprised. And I think Niv said something like, it's stories that run the world. It's not data. And again, in a city like Cambridge, we can have a debate about that, what runs the world.
But when you present data, you present the story about the data. Otherwise, people can't process it. So you still, even when you're a data person, you're still telling stories.
So move on. You began to hint at this. So I was thinking back my engagement with films. 1977. I was 6 or 7 years old, and a new film came out. There was a lot of hype around it. It was called Star Wars. Those who are younger, you won't be able to believe that cinemas used to have one screen in them, and there'd be a queue that would go round the block. And that's where the phrase blockbusters came from. From some films, it would bust the block. You'd queue for hours outside. I went in to see it, and from the moment it started, I was just transported. I wasn't I wasn't thinking about what's going on. But if I was to ask the question, like, what are films doing? You hinted a little bit already, but what are films trying to do in their storytelling?
Oh, they're trying to do so many things. So, yeah, I mean, at a simple level, a film is trying to thrill us, scare us, excite us, make us laugh, make us cry. And all of those things are emotional things. So I think, in many ways, the most fundamental thing any story is trying to do is to take us on an emotional journey. A developed narrative, not a simple "what happened to you last week," but a more involved narrative is taking us on an emotional journey, and the filmmakers or the novelist wants us to feel stuff and to be moved to reflect in particular ways, to come out of their story with a particular kind of response. Now, there's a sense in which a filmmaker knows that they can't guarantee what that's going to do, but they know what kind of response they want to generate in people's minds.
With our boys, we've just been watching some of the back catalogue of Doctor Who. So it's not
the real back catalogue.
Well, not that far back.
Okay.
Not Tom Baker. So it was only back to Matt Smith. But ahead of thinking about this, there's one episode that we just saw recently, and I know this is not cinema, but Flesh and Stone, and there's these baddie characters in it, the Weeping Angels. And there's a scene that goes on, I just thought was fascinating in light of this, that they're on a screen, and the doctor says to his assistant, don't look at the screen too much. If you watch them on the screen, they will get inside you. And I thought, isn't that fascinating? Yeah. And that's what you're saying. Yeah. I think films and stories like this, they're not in a creepy way, or maybe they're getting inside you.
Yeah. Yeah, C.S. Lewis talked about great stories so he wrote this brilliant essay called An Experiment in Criticism about literature, but it applies to film as well. And he says they enlarge us. So when we encounter a good story, it is an enlarging thing. And he says, I want to see through other eyes. I want to imagine through other people's imaginations. I want to feel through other people's hearts, and I want to feel more through my own heart. And he talks about becoming, in reading great literature, I become 1,000 men and yet remember myself. And there's a way in which we enlarge our understanding, we enlarge our appreciation of different ways of looking at life, different ways that people feel. It helps us to get into other people's minds and hearts and think, oh, the world looks really different to you than it does in my head.
Can you give us, and I've not given you any, I not told you I was going to ask this, but can you give us an example of that? Is there any films that come to mind for you that have done that in some ways, and the ways? And if you can't, don't worry, because I've just put you on the spot there.
This is an odd example to come to mind, because it's not a film I would particularly it's not a film I would recommend to almost anybody, I think, but a very powerful film called Tyrannosaur. British actor Pelly Considine, it was his directorial debut. And it's a film about a guy who life has treated him really badly, and he has a massive anger problem. So the opening scene, there's a dog tied up outside a betting shop, and you hear this man, played by Peter Mullen, shouting and screaming and swearing in the betting shop, and he comes out and he kicks his dog so hard that he kills his dog. And then a little bit later he gets into an altercation with a couple of yobbos in a pub, and he has to run, and he takes refuge in a charity shop. I mean, this guy's horrible. But he's befriended by somebody in the charity shop, played by Olivia Colman, who he's hiding behind this rail of coats, and she says, "Can I pray for you?" And he just weeps. And it's a story of this really hard man, really violent, objectionable man, but also a man with deep vulnerabilities, beginning to realize that it's not just him that's broken, the whole world is broken. and that the response to that is not violence. Though actually he never quite escapes from that, but that's, we'll leave that on one side. But he begins to realise that there are other things going on, and you see this heart beginning to break open. And yeah, it's a window into a kind of an experience and a kind of background and a kind of brokenness that's so alien to me. But it was so powerful because it's so brilliantly done, and it got you into his mind, it got you into his heart. And it wasn't a very pleasant place to be.
No, but that's how you can, I guess, look at films in just at one level, and it's fine to do this. I like this or I don't like this.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be horrible if that happened to me. Or I would really enjoy that if that happened to me. But this is saying something slightly different. The director, the filmmakers are saying, come and imagine life from this perspective.
Yeah.
Imagine looking at the world in this kind of way.
Yeah.
Or notice this kind of change that's going on.
So you could say a film is a vision statement. So the filmmakers have a vision of what life is, for good or bad, and often it's a mixture of both. And they're presenting that vision to you. Here's how I look at life. Here's how I look at reality. Here's how I look at the relationship between human beings and the world, within each human being, the relationship we have with ourselves, and sometimes a relationship with some kind of transcendent dimension, whether that be God or something else. So here's a vision of what it is, and also I think a vision of what it, perhaps in some ways, it's reaching towards what it could be or should be.
We're going to move on because we've got a limited amount of time. Now, with forms of art or all sorts of things, explaining them, it seems like at times you can take the power out of them, and it's a bit like explaining a joke. If you've got to explain it, you're not, you just enjoy it. And I'm going to ask you now a question about just explaining some things about films to help us think about it. But at some level, they are to be watched and just felt as much as, more so than just analysed. But if I was to, I wrote the question down so I'd get it right. I guess one of the insights I had is thinking anything in a film is not there by chance.
Yep.
Everything is deliberate.
Yep.
It's things like if there's a scene in a room and there's a cross on the wall, it's there deliberately. All those kind of things.
Yep.
It's not just, we had a room. It's all put together to communicate something. But if we want to get what's going on in a film and think about them.
So they're watching Groundhog Day there. And in that scene, they're sitting in the diner, and there's a clock on the wall. And there's some significance in the clock. But also, just to the side of that, there's a clipping from a newspaper article. And it's really significant. You just don't notice it because it's just in the background. But they have to think, what are we going to put on the walls in this diner? And so the set designer has to think through all of these little details. And everything that you see in that scene is there deliberately. And it contributes something. Maybe small, maybe just character reinforcement, but everything is deliberate.
So if you've seen Groundhog Day and not noticed the newspaper clipping on the wall in the diner, go back and watch it again.
Absolutely.
Hit pause, zoom in.
It's not the key to the whole film, but it's nice to see.
Look, there's some other films up there. Tell us a little bit about the other things. You've mentioned some things. Do you know what's going to come up on these slides?
I can guess. Yeah, that's a tree. Before we get to structure, I think when you're thinking about a film or any story, one of the first thing, maybe not the first thing, but one of the things we need to think about is the roots. Where has this film come from? What's the soil in which this tree is growing? So if it's a Hollywood film, it's coming from a certain kind of context. If you're watching a French film, that's coming from a different kind of context. If you're watching an old film, that's coming from another context. And it may be that we know a bit about the filmmaker. So we know what, the Marvel films, for example, they're made by a whole bunch of different filmmakers, but they're all coming out of a similar kind of place. And so there's a sense in which knowing what kind of thing we're dealing with when we watch a film is really helpful, because that can give us an interpretive key to the thing in some ways. And so if you go and watch a Wes Anderson film, you know that it's got a certain kind of sensibility. It's going to be looking at certain kind of questions. It's got a certain angle on life, and there'll be particular kind of questions it raises because it's coming from Wes Anderson. And then you can go on to think about what's the structure of the film? How does the thing as a whole fit together? What's the basic arc of the story? What are the key turning points? If you read film theory, generally it will tell you that films are written on a 3-act structure in common with most drama. There's an American writer on film called Kristen Thompson who actually argues that most of them you can find a 4-act structure. So when Jane and I went to see The Devil Wears Prada, there was a point at which she said, "What are you doing?" Because I always take a notebook to the cinema. And on this particular evening, she had persuaded me, "Please, can we go without your notebook?" So she said, "What are you doing?" And I had to confess that I was timing it, because I said there's going to be a major turning point in about 2 minutes. And there was! Oh, how justified was I?
And date nights with Tony Watkins are very exciting, and not only that, but he makes it into competition as well. That's it, and get the timings right.
Perhaps I shouldn't be admitting to this.
No, it's just wonderful insights. I think my wife hasn't quite forgiven me for the date night where we went to see a Wes Anderson film. She'd never seen one before, and it was not quite what she expected. She thought it looked visually stunning, but couldn't understand anything that was going on in the story.
That's fair enough.
Yeah. Do I move the slide on?
Yeah, you can.
I mean, we can go through these things or not. These are some things you suggested. Structure.
Yeah.
Or
so thinking about the structure. So there's some setup, there's some complicating action, but what's the goal? The central character, the protagonist, has a goal. They're trying to achieve something. Whether they achieve it or not, it's often neither here nor there, because they go, well, we'll come back to this in a minute, but they go through a process of change. But it's that goal that's the driving action through the whole film. That's some tension, some conflict that has to be resolved. And so you've got some complicating action, some conflict coming in, and then there's setbacks to that, and then eventually there's some kind of resolution. So just thinking at that kind of simple level about the structure, and all this applies equally well to literature and television as well. And then you can start thinking about the details, which appears just by magic. Look at that, it's amazing. You can think about what's some of the details. So you may be, if you're obsessive like me, you may be watching the tiny little details of what's on the wall behind people's heads. Though to be fair, I didn't watch that didn't see what was on the wall the first 10 or so times I saw Groundhog Day.
Don't feel you need to invest this much in films, but I'm going to keep us going on as well, so that you notice the detail. But just to be aware, if you spot a detail, it's there for a reason.
Yeah. And the details are not just necessarily the things in the set. What's called the mise en scène, how the things are arranged in front of the camera. It's what is the camera doing? Where is the camera looking? Is the camera moving? Is it pushing in, or is it pulling back? Is it tracking across? Is it a wide angle? Is it a close-up? Are we going really super close-up? What's the lighting? How is this scene being edited? Is it being edited very quickly, very slowly? Are they quick cuts, or are they dissolved transitions, often suggesting there's a passage of time, or it's a flashback that's going on? What's going on with the sound? The first of the Godfather trilogy, there's a scene where Michael Corleone is about to make his first killing, and he's in an Italian restaurant, and there's a conversation going on in Italian, and Walter Murch, the sound editor, pulls this brilliant trick, because he begins to fade down the dialogue, which you're not making any sense of anyway, unless you're an Italian speaker. And he goes out to the loo, and he gets the gun from where he's hidden it. And as he does that, you begin to hear the sound of the screeching of train wheels as they go around a bend. And you've never seen a train in The Godfather, but it's the kind of area of New York where they've got these elevated subway tracks. So it kind of makes sense. But then as this psychological tension ratchets up in him as he's about to go and kill somebody for the first time, this screech just dominates the whole thing. And it's showing you what's going on inside his head. Absolutely genius. So what's going on at sound level as well? What's being spoken? What are the actors doing? Are they glancing and looking shifty? And can they not sit still on their stool because it's quite uncomfortable, or they're just generally fidgety people?
It's why we do it. It's all part of the experience. And you mentioned, you said you come back to this transformation.
Yeah. So there's always some kind of transformation. So I talk about people often talk about a narrative arc for a protagonist, the central character, but I think it's more than that. It's not just that they go through a story, but they go through some kind of transformation. They're not the same person at the end as they are at the beginning. So Groundhog Day, brilliant example. Here's this selfish, self-obsessed weather presenter played by Bill Murray, who has to go through the same day over and over and over again. And he tries to satisfy his needs. He's just a complete hedonist. And then he becomes despairing. He becomes a nihilist. He's trying to kill himself. And then eventually he begins to discover that doing good things is actually a nice thing to be. And by the end of it, he's transformed into this amazingly talented, super caring.
Can play the piano.
He can play the piano, yes, yeah. And he's become a good guy. So there's an obvious example of a big transformation. Sometimes you don't get a transformation. So Andrew Niccol, who was the writer of The Truman Show, he did a film called Lord of War with Nicolas Cage, not an actor I like. He was perfect for this role. He was just a nasty piece of work. I'm not saying that Nicolas Cage is a nasty piece of work, but he was just perfect for playing this nasty piece of work. He was an arms dealer, and this guy faces all kinds of challenges, and you kind of expect a transformation, the transformative arc. You expect that by the end, this guy's going to be on his knees, repenting and becoming a Christian because he sees the error of his ways, but he doesn't. He goes back to being an arms dealer. And then he has a voiceover at the end, and he says, I learned that you should never go to war, especially with yourself. So I was back doing what I did best. And you think, this is not right. This is not how it's supposed to end. You feel cheated because you expect that transformation.
And just on that, I mean, I remember seeing that film. I've not thought about it before, but is the director saying something there? Is it saying, how awful is this? Or is it saying, don't go to war with yourself? Do you think that film is doing a kind of counterpoint to that and saying, look how terrible it would be if you never change? Yeah,
he is. And then he's very clever, because then as soon as you think, oh my goodness, why? This is not how it should end. He puts up some text over a tracking shot going over hundreds, thousands and thousands of bullets and shells. And he says, the 5 biggest arms dealers in the world are the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. Oh, we're all complicit in this. That's very powerful. And if he changed, if he'd had the expected transformation, it would have had no power at all. So it's very clever.
No, the film's got a punchline.
Yeah.
There. Opposition, influence.
Yeah, the characters are always facing some opposition along the way. So I don't know, it could be the weather in the day after tomorrow, or there's a volcano, or whatever. But often if it's a Bond film, it's Blofeld or some other obvious enemy. Actually, Bond never has any significant transformation. A little bit, particularly in the newer films, but you don't
they're not
expect
proper
that.
Bond films, I don't think.
Maybe.
Anyway.
Yeah. The opposition may be internal as well. So
I feel like I was thinking as we come to that, a film like Up.
Oh, yeah.
In some ways, the opposition is grief, isn't
Absolutely.
it? That one thing, and how do you? And you think, oh gosh, because the opening scenes of that film, devastating. But I just to think.
It's best not to talk about Up, because I just get quite choked up about it. So, carry on anyway. I'll compose myself.
But it's helpful. But even just to think about what is the thing that is being seeking to be overcome here, and can you overcome it?
Yes.
Yeah, and Have we talked the last one?
Yeah,
Influence?
and so then there's, because a film is a vision statement, because of here is a presentation of how the filmmakers, and that's a complicated question, whose story is it? You know, you've got the writer, you've got the director, but let's stick with the director because that's simplest. They want to give you a view of the world as it is, or as they perceive it to be, and a view of how it could be better in some respects. So it could be as simple as world's a better place if you have a great romantic relationship, or the world could be a better place if you go back to being an arms dealer because you're at least at peace with yourself, or actually it's not good to be an arms dealer at all. So that the filmmakers, they would all say, or most of them would say, we're not out to change people, we just want to tell a story. But actually no, they do want to change you. They do want you to buy into their vision of a world in some way. So yeah, here's us sitting in front of a film, watching the film. What is this doing to us, whether deliberately or not? So Philip Pullman, brilliant atheist British writer, wrote His Dark Materials trilogy. When he won the Carnegie Medal, in his acceptance speech, he said, all stories teach, whether the storyteller intends them to or not. They teach the world we create and the morality we live by. And I think that's a really insightful comment. So even if the storyteller is not setting out to do something to you consciously, nevertheless, because this story is an expression of who they are, what their view of the world is, what their morality is, what makes them tick. It's an expression of them, and therefore that teaches us something, that does something to us, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, it must do, doesn't it? We're engaging, aren't we, at some point, and we'll always be responding. What do I think of this? Would I like to be that kind of a person, or do I recoil from that?
And because of the nature of narrative, we've put our intellectual guard down very often. So you know that Lewis talks about the Narnia Chronicles, it gets past the watchful dragons of the soul. Film does the same thing. Ingmar Bergman, he said, film is dream, film is music. No art gets past our conscience in the way that film does. Penetrates to the deep, dark rooms of our soul.
Say that again, that phrase again. That was good. The watchful dragons of our soul.
That was Lewis's phrase about Chronicles of Narnia. He said that the narrative gets past the watchful dragons in order to communicate something, because it gets past our radar about, you're trying to do something to me here, but actually we're so engaged with the story, we're being so moved by it, that we can drop our critical guard and just
we just
go
feel
with
it and go with it, and then it's got through to us.
And that can be really, it can take you in completely the wrong direction. It can make you want something that actually, you think, why am I wanting these two to get together when this is completely contrary to what I believe as a Christian? So, can't remember the name of the film. I won't use that example.
But I think I know the kind of thing you mean. So I remember the first, there was the film, I think a very good film, Philadelphia, Tom Hanks film.
Yeah.
It was at the height of when AIDS was in the news a lot, and I just find the film really moving, and it is moving.
Yep.
And then I noticed that all the baddies in it were all slightly overweight, middle-aged white men. And I thought, and all the goodies looked very different. And the film was very gently saying, whose side do you want to be on?
Yeah.
And I thought, now, even before I get to engage with the message of it, I thought, you're doing something quite subtle here. You're setting this up so that I will be drawn emotionally in one direction, even before I've engaged with the idea. Absolutely. I suppose that moves me on to the next question for engaging. First, a Christian response. I can imagine the kind of two extreme Christian responses. One would be the kind of, the media is dangerous, stay away from it. And art, what has that got to do with anything? And the art and film, let's stay away from that. And others that are saying, no, we've got to engage with everything. It's wonderful, it's creative, just pile in. How should we be finding a way through that as Christians?
It's a tightrope, I think, because there's truth in both of those. The Bible is absolutely uncompromising that we need to be growing in holiness. And a lot of media does not help us in our holiness. Doesn't contribute to that in any positive way. At the same time, passages like Acts 17 and in many ways, I would say the whole dynamic of Scripture, God communicating within human culture, within all of the brokenness and the sinfulness of human culture, God takes that and he uses it and he communicates that. The incarnation is God engaging with the world in an extraordinary way. So I think we also must engage with culture. But those two things feel like they go in different directions. So we do have to walk on a tightrope. We're not going to stay on that tightrope. Sometimes we're going to fall off, and if we fall off, we need to fall on the holiness side. So I think all of us need to know what's the line for me beyond which I shouldn't go. There are some things that actually are really unhelpful for me to watch, and for many people, particularly for most men, watching films with very explicit sexual content, it's not helpful for us. It's best if we just keep away from that. And of course, sometimes you watch a film and you don't realise it's going to come. But, you just have to deal with that. But yeah, we need to be careful about those kinds of things. But there would be other people for whom violence is a major issue, or horror could be something that really just is very derailing to you, whereas for other people it's not an issue at all. So we need to know what our own weaknesses are and guard against that. But then there are times when I would go and watch films with friends who are not Christians, a film that I perhaps wouldn't necessarily choose, but they're going to go, and so I'll engage with the film then in a slightly different way. I'll deliberately distance myself from the film. I wouldn't normally want to distance myself. I normally want to let the film do to me what the filmmaker wants. But if I know that this is going to be an unhelpful film to me, but I'm going with a friend for the sake of that relationship and the conversation we're going to have, then I'll try and back off and be a bit more analytical. But I'll try and avoid it anyway. So you go and watch it and we'll talk about it afterwards anyway.
Yeah, I know it's... we need to move on or get another question to that. I was also going to say, do you buy nachos when you go to the cinema?
Absolutely not.
Good. We could watch films together then, because that should never be allowed.
Eating in cinemas generally should not be allowed.
Yeah, it's very soft food. No. Not even no food at all?
No.
Are you allowed to take your shoes off?
No.
Put your feet on the chair in front? No, definitely not. I'm testing you here. Using a smartphone? No. Having a notebook? Having a notebook?
Yes.
Yeah. It's funny how your own stuff you're fine with.
As long as you don't have a light-up pen.
Yeah, okay. Another friend said to me once, because Jesus is Lord of all, a good conversation is only ever a hair's breadth away from a gospel conversation.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that you're saying is, look, films are saying something, a lot of them that's interesting. There's a conversation to be had. We've got some things coming up. You maybe just chat us through ways to, look, if we're thinking we're watching a film, how could I maybe begin to engage with someone? Or, not that I'll do all of these, but I might have some of these things in my mind just to have good conversations. We did that.
Yeah.
Things in films?
Yeah, so I think quite a few years ago I started working on the idea that I think the stories that we tell, if Tolkien is right, that in his essay on fairy stories, if he's right that the stories we tell are somehow reflections of the gospel, then every story that we tell should be reflecting something of the biblical storyline. And I began to work on this idea, and I was feeling quite pleased about this. And then some bloke in the States called Mike Cosper published a book called The Stories We Tell, doing exactly that.
He stole your book before you'd even written it.
I know, and yeah. And then I let a good length of time pass, and I thought, okay, I can do this again now. And then Matt Lillicrap and Pete Dre did another book on the same kind of thing. So twice. Anyway, so I'm not going to write that book. But here are 8 things that in ways in which the stories that we tell reflect the biblical storyline. So firstly, Losing Paradise. You've got a setup of the film where everything's great at the beginning, and then something goes terribly wrong. And you're trying to recover the goodness, which has an obvious echo of the Garden of Eden, of course. So Frozen. Everything's great at the beginning, and then there's this accident early on in the film, and everything just goes terribly wrong from that point on. And this sweet, innocent life that Anna and Elsa have has just broken apart completely.
Yeah.
Actually, Frozen's a good example of just about all of them.
Well, not for me, because I've not seen it, because we've got people in our house that don't want to watch it. Yeah.
They'll watch it when they grow up.
Yeah, okay. Breaking Free, do you want to comment on that while I go through these?
Do you want me to comment on them? Or?
Well, just if you can give us a brief insight into the kind of things to look out for a film with...
Yeah, so the Breaking Free, again, so Adam and Eve breaking free from the Lord in their rebellion. But that urge to break free is actually deep within us. We want to break free from constraints, and sometimes that's a positive thing. So Francis Annan's utterly brilliant film Escape from Pretoria, based on a true story of a couple of apartheid activists in Pretoria prison and trying to get out of that. So there's a really positive trying to break free of something that's wrongly imprisoning people. But it also could be, as in The Truman Show, a story of breaking free, or it's a parable of breaking free from the control of God. So breaking free can be a good thing or a bad thing, but there's a lot of breaking free kind of dynamics going on.
And just to look out for that.
Yep.
Remaking the world. So
once they're out of the garden, then Cain starts building a city, and they're trying to create they've lost the shalom that they experience with God, where the relationship with God, the relationship with each other, the relationship with the world and with themselves, all of those were flourishing in harmony. So that's a good state of shalom. They've lost that. And so human beings then try to create artificial versions. So he creates a city to protect himself. You see the community beginning to grow, the families are growing, and he's the father, becomes the father of the metal workers and the musical instrument makers. They're good things. They come after the fall, but they're not a product of the fall. So we try to make the world or remake the world because we want to create a world that feels safe and comfortable. We're trying to get some kind of artificial shalom on our terms rather than on God's terms.
And shows, I think in terms of films where this one's defeating enemies, tell us some of the films where people will recognise where that's going on.
So many. Paddington.
My friend's daughter, her favourite character in the first Paddington film was Nicole Kidman. And every time we said she's the baddie, no, she isn't. I like her the best. And you thought, there's something not right with you there. It's just like... But in a sense of that bigger thing, in films as well, defeating enemies, because it speaks to something, there's a sense of... In life, there's a sense of threat.
Yeah. So there's a lot of defeating enemies right through the Old Testament, but then there's the ultimate enemies of sin, the death, and the devil that need to be defeated. But I distinguish between defeating enemies and the next one, overcoming brokenness, which is more the internal enemies that have to be defeated. But it's not necessarily just internal enemies, but that we feel broken, the world is broken, and we're trying to put that back. So Tyrannosaur that I mentioned is really looking at how do we deal with the brokenness of the world, because it's just awful.
And it's worth, and this is going to be the last question I ask you in just a moment, but that sense of why do we want those? Why do those kind of stories really speak to us? Somebody who wins at the end, and how unsatisfying it is when someone doesn't win at the end. Seeking wisdom.
Yeah, so there's a lot of wisdom in the Old Testament, and we're looking for stuff. We're looking for insight into how to live. So in some ways, it's a reflection of the overcoming the brokenness. It's that sense of there's got to be a better way to live. Where do I find a better way to live? So yeah, often films that are exploring other worldviews in very explicit ways are trying to seek after wisdom.
Or a film like Good Will Hunting.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's which is linked to the next one, is, I guess, seeking wisdom. In that film, find somebody you love.
Yeah, but it's not just romantic love. It's finding love that's true. It could be family love, friendship, or whatever. It may be romantic love. But we just resonate so strongly with a film where there's a really good, strong relationship by the end of it. So Paddington again.
You talk a lot about Paddington, Groundhog Day, and Bambi. That's and Tyrannosaur, which is the outlier.
I have quite an extreme taste in films.
And I get the sense of finding home.
Yep.
Being in a place where you're secure. Now, tell me, just because we're going to wrap things up now, but all those kind of things, and I guess people can say, I've either seen those before or those resonate as I'm watching films. I find myself emotionally drawn. But as we want to talk with others about it, are there ways you've found kind of winsomely to not say things like, oh, that's funny, in The Matrix there was somebody called Trinity. Do you know what? Let me tell you about a bit in the Bible or here, but that's not what we're talking about. What are some winsome ways just to move conversations on?
Take the film on its own terms first. So I think that when the first Matrix film came out, there was so much Christian nonsense on the chat rooms and bulletin boards, because it was that stage of the internet. There was just so much nonsense being talked about because people were seeing these Christian elements and jumping on them and saying, yes, look, it's a Christian film. It was not a Christian film. It was thoroughly postmodern, but it was using some Christian ideas. So take the film on its own terms, let it speak, and then say, and there's other stuff going on. But I think those 8 themes, I have not been able to identify a single film that doesn't have at least one of those, often more than one. And so if you can say, this is a film about the longing for home, and then you can begin to talk about the longing for home, and that may open up a possibility of talking about the fact that we are made to long for home because we're longing for an eternal home. Years and years ago, when Spice World the movie came out, it was in the early days of Damaris, and we'd set up discussion groups all around the country, and there was a discussion group of youth workers in Worthing, and I was supposed to be going to their next meeting. And because the Spice Girls were huge, they said, we'll go and see Spice World the movie. So Muggins here had to go and watch Spice World the movie. So I went on a Monday afternoon because I thought there'd be nobody in the cinema. I didn't want people seeing me. And I wore my tie and I carried my reporter's notebook and I tried to look like I'm here for work. And it was me and 2 teenage girls skiving school for the afternoon. And they must have thought, what is this middle-aged bloke doing watching Spice World? End of that week was at a dinner party at a friend's. He was an aeronautics engineer and there was a professor from his department there. And he knew I'd started this new job. And he said, so how's the new job going, Tony? I said, it's great, love it. He said, what have you seen recently? Well, on Monday I watched Spice World the movie. So after the general hilarity around the table that I was watching very highbrow entertainment, Robin, this professor, said, but there's nothing in, isn't it just hedonism? And we had the most amazing conversation about hedonism and, was hedonism a decent way to live? Where does it take you? Are there good forms of hedonism, bad forms of hedonism? And we got onto the gospel. And afterwards, my friend said, in the years he'd been trying to talk to him, they had never got onto gospel issues in that kind of way. And I thought, well, that was really quite a lesson, that even something like as empty-headed as Spice World the movie, actually there's still stuff to talk about.
If you've not seen it, great film. Of all the films with the double-decker bus in it, Spice World the movie and Summer Holiday are 2 of the best by a long way. Tony, time's gone on. I've not kept us to time. Can we show just our appreciation for Tony just for a moment? We're going to close off with a final song, but just take a moment, again, turning with people sitting beside you, and just say anything that struck you from that tonight you want to remember, or a question you'd ask, because we have tea and coffee afterwards. If you can hang around, Tony will be here. Come and ask some more questions. But just take a moment, turn with the people sitting beside you, and just reflect on things that we've heard. And then the musicians are going to head back up before we sing our closing song. Thanks, Tony.